afternoon, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of World Edition on Pod TV. And today I'm honored to host a special edition show on our network, The WOTE, the worst of all time presidents of the United States, as we build up to President's Day in February. Before I open up and bring in our panelists, I'll just say this. There have been 46 men in our nation since the founding of our republic who have been part of the exclusive club, the presidency of the United States. We know the greatest as we see the three of the presidents on Mount Rushmore: Theodore Roosevelt, George Washington, and Teddy Roosevelt. And we see other great presidents who have inspired us through crisis, who have led us through times, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or the man who saved the Union, President Lincoln. But we very seldom talk about the worst presidents, those who did not manage crisis well, who were tainted with scandal, and even resigned from the office which they were elected. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who once said, "No man who is ever elected president will ever leave with as great a reputation as carried him into it." And that's what we will discuss today on the worst of all time presidential special edition. We welcome you to the show, and this is based on our LinkedIn poll. Today, we'll be looking at the four following presidents: Richard Milhous Nixon, James Buchanan, the 15th president of the United States, James Earl Carter, who was president up until 1980, and I'm blanking out on the last one, gentlemen, Donald J. Trump, the 45th president and former president of these United States of America. So let the games begin. Today, I bring into the studio, we have Nick Paladiva, our boss, founder of Pod TV, Mark Lee, my co-host, and a radio celebrity, Sasha Starr from Canada, the who runs Modern Investing, and also the Chestar Show. And then we have Peter. Welcome again, sir. I had the honor of being the moderator today, so my goal is to do less talking. So I'm going to open it up to the panel to share your thoughts of how we arrive at this decision. What are the factors that go in? And how do we try to be as objective as possible for any of you folks that are not big fans of Donald J. Trump? I'll do my best as a moderator to be objective. For those of you listening, I am a Democrat. I'm a moderate Democrat. I've won 4 elections with Republicans and independents and Democrats. But I will try to be kind and not just use this as a Trump bashing event. With that being said, let's begin with Peter, our newest guest. Peter, it's been a long time since I've seen you. Welcome to the special edition.
Very good. Thank you.
What are your thoughts today as we have this conversation? I'll try to drive it the best I can, but really want to hear from you all of what you think and how we're going to get to the worst by President's Day.
Well, I think you're saying basically you want to start with a discussion of what parameters we would be using, correct?
Yes.
So the way I view it, there's really 3 things to look at mainly. There's domestic economy and events. There's foreign policy, foreign events, and also policies, because sometimes it doesn't affect anything economically, and within that, there's a lot of opinion, obviously, on certain aspects, but those are the 3 ways I look at it, basically: domestic economy, foreign affairs, and policies that make sense, and that's more objective.
Okay, very good, Peter. Very helpful.
I was just going to add some context for those that are wondering about this poll and everything, since I was actually the one that created the poll.
Please.
And created it early in the morning. I was up and one day and I was thinking to myself, let's see, what can I get? Because our good boss and everything, Nick, was having fun with polls. And I was like, hey, let me think of a poll that I can get out there that might be of interest. And that's when I came up with the idea of the worst president. So I brought out 4 and everything. I've had people ask me why I did not pick certain ones, including Biden, and I agree with you that he hasn't really had a chance to really put out whether he's going to be a good or a worst one in that context. But I wasn't even thinking of that at the time. Like I said, I definitely knew that a lot of people were having a lot of opinions about Trump, some favorable, some not as favorable. And then I definitely remembered the era of Carter, being in my late 50s. So I would have been definitely in those teen years around the time that Carter was in office, and later Reagan would have been in office when I was in my college years. But I definitely remember a little bit about Carter. And then, of course, I was part of the reason I decided to go into journalism was because of Nixon and the whole Watergate scandal. So I definitely knew a lot about that, being a much younger person at that particular time. And it definitely still influences our views of politics and the way that we judge our presidents based on that scandal that was going on when I was a mere lad at that time. And then I was going, well, I don't have a historical person. So I think I'd asked some people, and they were saying, do you know anything about Buchanan and what his legacy was? And I did a little bit of research. And I was like, okay, he looks like he's had some problems going on coming around the time of Lincoln. Let's add a historical figure. And that is how Buchanan's name came up and everything. But I've had some interesting comments, and I will probably bring some of those comments up. And if anybody is wondering, you get 4 options. That's the other thing, is that with LinkedIn posts, you only have a maximum of 4 options and everything. So that's why it stopped there, instead of me putting out 8, 10, 12, however many others I could have done in a different type of poll. But the results came out that Trump was the winner, at least in this group, with 41%, even though it was neck and neck there for a while. As even Nick knows, there was a time that Carter was ahead, but Carter finished with 40%, Buchanan with 7%, and Nixon with 13% out of that group of 4. And we got lots of comments, over 2,000 comments, 2,027. And I know that Nick is really big on views, and the views are still coming in even to this day. And at the last count, it was 456,745 views with 13,009 votes. So it definitely generated a lot of interest in that sense. And that's part of the reason.
If I could add one thing, the format of this show is going to, we didn't mention this, but we're going to have, each week we'll have 4 different presidents, I believe, and it's going to, and it will lead up to President's Day, when we will decide the worst president. So there will be a lot of presidents in there each week.
We want to go to Dan Worthington, and then Sasha, and then I'll sort of lay out sort of my perspective as we evaluate. I tried to do a little reading before we came in today. Dan, what are your thoughts before we go to Sasha? And then I'll try to.
Oh, well, I come from the conservative side of the spectrum, as you know. And I think that even though our illustrious current president has only had a year to extol his virtues, he's certainly done it in a very, very poor way. He, if I were to compare it to him with Trump right now, based on what Trump accomplished versus what he's accomplishing, or lack of his accomplishments, and in fact, he's total blunder, full of blunder. Him and as vice president are a train wreck. I mean, everyone can see it, and the majority of the people can see it. Whether you're on the right or the left, he hasn't very effective. Hasn't been a very effective president. And he's unlikely to become any better. He's more likely to become worse as he declines in his mental acuity, and that idiot vice president isn't making up any ground. She's one of the least popular vice presidents that's been on the ticket. So I don't know how Joe didn't make it in that list.
I think,
but Dan, that's only for the week. In other words, let's just spell this out again. We're doing 4 presidents, so we're focusing on these 4 today. But it's going to continue. So we're going to have 4 more presidents, and it'll be like an NCAA.
This is elimination
2 versus 2. The winners from each week will then go against each other.
Right.
So in the end, you get to the final 4, and then you get the
exactly.
All right. So
the winner is February 21st.
I think in order to compete before we go over to Sasha and Dan, we thank you for your opinion. I think in order to be considered for this award, you have to have at least completed 1 term of the presidency. Because, I realize that's your opinion, but he still got 3 more years. And, Bill Clinton had a really bad first 2 and actually came back. So I do think it's fair that the president, maybe in a few years, but the American people will either vote him out of office. If what you're saying is true, we need to see that happen. And if that happens, then yeah, he could be a category. But
Yeah,
I don't think
Bill
it's fair.
Steve,
1 year
Bill
into
Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar
Steve,
and had
why
a
don't we
brain.
take
yeah, but
that
he's 1
discussion
year into
off?
his presidency. 1 year into his presidency, and I don't
Well-
think it's fair. He's got 3 more years in his term, and I
Yeah,
think
but
it's
let's-
fair.
like I
Steve,
said, Bill
process.
Clinton had a
wait.
brain. He was a
Well,
Rhodes
you're missing
Scholar.
the point. You have to complete the term.
No,
One
that's
term,
your
4
point.
years.
Wait, Steve.
That's your
my
point,
would be
Stephen.
we should take this offline because we need to discuss the format of the show, but this is about the 4 presidents we're talking about this week, and then we'll discuss it because there's different opinions about whether Biden should be in there or not, and that's to be debated later, but offline. That's my
Yeah,
suggestion.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so Carter was a train wreck because he just had poor policies, high inflation, just was a poor leader. A better past president. I think he has more respect as a past president than he ever did as a president
Yes.
because he's a humanitarian and he's a great humanitarian, right? So I respect him for that. So Nixon, of course, the Watergate legacy, whatever you want to believe on yeah, that could go either way depending on your view of McGovern and how much of a train wreck he was and a threat to national security. I was around then and remember much of what was happening during that time. Of course, I can't make no opinion about Buchanan other than what history says about him. So who's the other one?
Nixon.
You covered them. It was Trump, Nixon,
Trump, Nixon,
Carter,
yeah.
and Buchanan and everything.
Trump was, despite his lack of personal political skill, had very good policies, was leading the country in a very good way, was being very successful until COVID. And, that's very accomplished, kept his promises for the most part. So, I mean, I don't know, he was elected by half of the people and he did what he told them he would do. And he even made some people who would have not been voting on his side happy with his side, but ticked off a lot of other people in the process. So, does that make him a bad president or a good president? I don't know.
Well, 2 questions that you just raised that I would love to hear the rest of the panel's ideas and thoughts about, including definitely Steve is doing a great job of moderating. But one of the things is that Jimmy Carter definitely has greater reputation after the fact than he did during his presidency. As a matter of fact, one of the people that responded back to our poll, Tommy T-Bone Kramers, said that Jimmy may not have been a president who was considered successful, but he did do a lot for underprivileged after he left the office. He did a book signing and he mentioned something that happened at that book signing where he was glad to have met that president. And a lot of people know him for his humanitarian work. So I guess one of the things we've got to decide is how much of a role there either before presidency and definitely there after the presidency played an impact into how they are treated by the history books. Because I've actually consider myself more of a Democrat than a Republican, even though I do have some views that are probably more on the Republican side or more on the conservative side. But that being said, one of the things that I loved about Nixon was this concept of enterprise zones. And he definitely did a lot in that space in the creation of those enterprise zones that are still to this day helping out a lot of the minority communities. And, there's a place here in North Carolina called Soul City, and Floyd McKissick, who is passed on, but his son is still involved in politics, was very much a advocate of those enterprise zones as well. And that was at the time that I was living in Warrenton, which was literally right next to Soul City, which is supposed to be an African-American community that was going to be a thriving community. As it is, it's not really all that thriving, but it's more of a rural bedside kind of community right now, and is attached to the town of Warrenton. But I was just wondering, but that's one of the things that we probably have to think about is the historical element and how much we want to include that into what our judgment is of the president.
I think the 2 categories, before we go to, Sasha Starr, go ahead and give it your thoughts. Sasha.
Okay, I know very little about Buchanan and cannot say one way or another of his chances to become a winner of this contest. It's very possible that he is a winner, but I know very little about that. Carter had the misfortune of being president after oil crisis of 1974, the very unfortunate situation with Iranian hostages, where he could do, frankly, very little. And the fact that the rescue mission was a fiasco, yeah, of course, at the end of the day, he is responsible for that one. But not directly. Now, that leaves us with Nixon. Beside Watergate, without that episode, very tragic one, of course, he was actually quite capable person, very interesting personality. But the Watergate, of course, was a major blow to his presidency. That leaves me with the Führer in chief, Donald Trump. Well, so much known about Donald Trump, but there is one thing that is cropping up is his role in the resurrection of January 6th. And if it would be established that he was in charge of that resurrection, and that makes him by far the worst person being elected president, one term, two impeachment, and this horrible insurrection of January 6th. But it's coming up. I think in near future we'll find out even more. However, my choice for the worst president is neither of these four, but it will be probably for the next program. It's
well, I think
okay. I'll keep it secret.
Well, we'll let Shaquille Latimer go real quickly. You know, the context before Shaquille, go ahead and go. I'm sorry, you haven't spoken yet. You're not feeling well, but Shaquille, do you have anything to add?
Well, I'm not sure what the question is.
The factors we need to be considering, how you approach these four presidents, how we decide who is the worst president.
Well, I mean, I think you've got to look at the totality of their time as the president and what effect it had on the United States and the people in the United States, first and foremost. Then you have to look at foreign policy. Did they needlessly involve the United States in foreign conflicts? That sort of stuff. So that's what I would look at. I don't think that Donald Trump even rates a mention. I think that he's only there because of the partisanship of today, that people don't like Donald Trump and they just hate him and he's the devil, incarnate, according to half the population of America. But if you leave aside the biasness, I don't think that Donald Trump did anything that dramatically harmed the United States. So I don't think that he would be on that list. Out of the four that you guys have put down, I would have thought that the president before Abraham Lincoln, James Buchanan, would be the president that would be the worst. But my personal view is that it's a different president who's the worst.
My take on it is, before I'm going to do my best to moderate and really let you guys. I think as we look at the categories, first of all, I think it's during the presidency, what crises emerged and the president's success or unsuccess in dealing with that crisis, and were there any scandals which occurred? So obviously, in this case, we've got Richard Nixon. I was 4 years old when Richard Nixon resigned the presidency. I was the son of immigrants from India. There was only 4 Indians in the state of West Virginia at that time, and I remember I wasn't having to go to school, and I remember how shaken many of these immigrants were, including my parents, because they had left India to come to America, and the very president who opened the door for them to come, he changed the law to allow doctors from India to come in without even going to medical school, resigned the White House. But as time goes on, the factors may look different. So as we look back now upon Nixon, he'd had a successful foreign, at that time with Kissinger, detente with China, and that situation has really changed. He led efforts to reform healthcare with health maintenance organizations. He was an accessible president. He was the president really that came from a rags to riches story, from Yorba Linda, and also the comeback story that he came back after losing to Kennedy and came back. So I think as we go over time, each president has had a different crisis. Now, of course, he left in disgrace. He covered it up. He told a lot of lies. That could be a factor. With Buchanan, I think the key factor here is that he didn't even give an option of preventing slavery. He knew that the country was divided, but he took no action, and really led to Lincoln becoming the president and then a civil war on our hands, right? And with Jimmy Carter, how do we put him as the worst when he's been the ex-president we've ever had? He did succeed with the Camp David Accords, but a lot of the other of his policies, were a failure. Iran hostage crisis, those kinds of things. And then with Donald J. Trump, I'm going to be as objective as I can. I want to challenge ourselves in terms of looking at. I think Trump came in with a good mandate, winning 300 electoral votes. I think he got through, as Dan Worthington said, things were actually going fairly well until COVID hit. And I think the question becomes, did he manage the crisis as well as he could have? On his watch, 500,000 Americans died. He did, however, initiate Operation Warp Speed. On his watch, we had an insurrection on the Capitol. He was impeached, but I think that was more partisan. And then the other thing I'd be curious about, I didn't have time to prepare, he said he was going to take on China. He was going to take on tariffs, and then ended up, it didn't look like a lot happened there. Not sure how many jobs he created. He said, we're going to make America great again, bring back the jobs. Did he bring back those jobs? And I'm just throwing this out here to say, do we need to, before we rate him as the worst, do we need to complete Biden's term and then go back and evaluate? Maybe they both were the worst. Maybe both these men. I mean, that's an argument that that America elected two bad presidents. I mean, maybe we need to. And I'm just throwing that out there, guys. So that's sort of my perspective on that. Mark Lee.
Yeah, I was getting ready to ask a couple of things. One is I was going to come back to Buchanan because he's actually known for something that is even an important issue this day. We're seeing it definitely become an issue, whether you want to bring it into the context of Roe versus Wade or whether you want to bring it into the context of voting rights and gerrymandering and things along those lines. But one of the things about Buchanan was that he was an avid supporter of state rights and states having greater rights even than they might have to this day. So to our esteemed panel, I was wondering your thoughts around the whole concept of state rights and how much that should play in our discussion as well, because that is one of the things that Buchanan definitely was involved in, was this support of state rights and things along those lines. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in that regard.
I'd like to say something about Buchanan. He's not my pick for today for sure, but he inherited a situation that was possibly impossible to solve, because back to the founding fathers, slavery was a huge issue. How do you treat, they were called African Americans then, so I'll use that term. How do you treat African Americans? Now, on one side, I mean, the Union was already at the brink of war, possibly, or it was going to happen inevitably, because you have a South that's depending on slaves and a North that had a different economy and viewed it totally different. Now, Buchanan encouraged or didn't do enough. He actually went along or even encouraged the Dred Scott decision, which was a major decision by the Supreme Court. And it said African Americans are not citizens, and it said federal government cannot get involved in this. This is, as you said, a states' rights issue. So, but he had a very difficult situation. And by my parameters, by the way, I look at policy, I look at domestic and foreign, and I happened to look up his economy, and it was right in the middle. So there was moderate inflation, there was moderate growth. It wasn't a bad economy, but he did. I mean, it was a huge failure because in the end he had to solve the problem. And as soon as he went out of office, Lincoln was elected, and 7 states succeeded at that moment, and it led to the Civil War. So he had a huge problem. But you know what? I'm not sure anybody could have done better. And I think that's part of it. But again, this was a 60-year-old problem, back more, 80-year-old, hundreds of years old, back to the point where they were bringing African Americans to the United States. That was going to be an issue. So there might have been a Civil War no matter what. And I don't think I would put Buchanan in there overall.
Peter, he also had another interesting distinction as well, which is the fact that, as far as I know, I mean, there might be some people that wonder about the sanctity of what their marriages were and everything. But as far as I'm able to understand, he was the only bachelor and a lifelong bachelor that was in the White House. So he also has that distinction as well. So some of the people may see that as a good attribute, and some other people might be like, why wasn't he able to find his other half and using
That's an
that kind of
interesting
context?
fact. I
But
did not know
that's
that.
something that maybe the women that are watching might add as one of their criteria, because they're probably going like, wait a minute, this man was a bachelor and had some interesting
Yes.
political jobs
Right. Well,
afterwards.
we'll call that
He was
neutral,
running
don't
for
you
president
think?
again and being some ambassadors and other jobs that he held even after he was elected.
Don't we? I think we could call that a neutral, right?
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
like you said, some people would be positives on that, some people would be negative. So I would say we can put that aside. But just like I kind of feel about his presidency. I mean, he had a terrible situation. He didn't resolve it. He wasn't a great president for sure. But I'm not sure that. I mean, given the fact of some of the other situations we're going to meet with presidents where they could have been resolved easier, it wasn't an 80-year-old problem. It wasn't so complex. I would not give Buchanan the vote for the worst president.
I think my argument too is I think that we need to give it. I think we might want to give Trump a few more years out before we just throw him and say that he was the worst president, because I think we need to evaluate where we are after Joe Biden's presidency in terms of jobs, foreign policy. I mean, look, there's been a lot of mistakes both these guys made, Biden and Trump. I still see a very inconsistent foreign policy of the United States. I see no strategy that's effective against China. We're seeing disruption and taking place all over the world. And I think the political circumstances today with both these presidents and any president moving forward, this country is so divided. So each nominee of each party has their base. Trump was respected by 82% of Democrats, but I mean Republicans, but only 4% of Democrats. I think that with the social media and all of that stuff, there's just such division that it's almost as if each side is going to say so. Although we might say, and I'm just being a media guy here, guys. It's easy for me. I did not support Donald Trump. I did not think he was a good president, but I'm trying to be objective as a moderator to say, I think we need to sort of look at the whole picture, and it's tough. And I need to do some research in terms of the jobs. I want to see, did he deliver on all the things he said when he said America was great again?
Steve, I'd like to jump in on Trump too, because he's not my vote either. And let me say, first of all, for the show, I did a lot of Google research, and I looked up 10 page, and I want to get into the substance of what I found, but I looked up, I put in for each one, worst president, and I started looking at the issues because I wasn't an expert on Buchanan. So what I did is, but when I hit Trump, it was something unusual. I went through 10 pages of Google sites, and I found very little of substance. There, I found some, and I'll mention that, but a lot of what his criticisms were and why people criticize him were political. First of all, I will say, I mean, on policy is one thing, but his demeanor, it alienated some people. He's a little gruff. He's not a great communicator, and he has flaws. He's not a perfect guy. But if you look at the reasons that people came up with on all the sites, he was impeached, but that was political. That was partisan. He was impeached for the Ukraine scandal, and depending where you get your news, you either think it's totally a lie or totally true. Personally, I think that those impeachments were political and not based in reality, of the facts. But that's what I think. But he's criticized because there were sharp divisions in America. Well, that's kind of like Buchanan. He inherited a very divided America, and we're more divided now. We're just as divided as ever. But he was criticized for that. That's one of the things that comes up if you Google him. So I don't really give any sway to that. I look at a lot of positives, and then I'll go back to a negative. But he actually accomplished more legislation and executive action and if you look at him, a lot of them were positive than any other president ever, including Roosevelt. And that is surprising, but among which he had I'll go through a list of some of the things he did and didn't do. He had an economy that grew without inflation. And I will add to Steve's comment, actually, he grew the manufacturing economy a lot. He did bring back jobs, and that tariff was really helpful in that. And I'm a big supporter of tariffs on China for a lot of reasons. That could be a whole nother show. But that was a positive. He avoided wars. He did not get us into any wars. That's a positive. He didn't get us into any entanglements. He forced Europe to pay more for defense, which was ridiculous. Why? They promised to pay 2%, and they were paying 1 or whatever on average. And he brought them much closer. He supported our military in an amazing way. You cannot believe the statistics I saw on the American military when he came into office. Something like 1/3 of our Air Force could not get off the ground. I mean, they couldn't even fly. The undersupplies everywhere. The Navy had issues, gigantic issues. So, he made the United States energy independent. For the first time ever. And that I'll get into a negative in a minute, but that he eliminated robocalls or banned them. He hasn't eliminated them totally, but that happened under his watch. He allowed the use of experimental drugs for people who are dying in dire needs. And that made total sense again, common sense. He developed the coronavirus vaccine. Now, people were saying when he said he'd do this, impossible. It will take 5 years, 10 years to develop. And what happened is he developed it within 1 year. And so if you look at all his accomplishments across the board, but there were some negatives more. First of all, as I said, his personality. 2, climate change. Now, this is really difficult issue to judge because everybody has a different opinion about it. But I would say, I even have mixed feelings about it, but I'm very agnostic and I'm concerned about climate change. So I think that where Trump failed, and I think he would have been had a much better view. People would have viewed him better if he had at least addressed climate change more and maybe looked for solutions where we could have energy and still do more on climate change. So no way is Trump in there overall. And I have, 2 other candidates that I think are worse.
Speaking of candidates that might be worse and everything, I was going to get back to one of our comments from our folks in the commentation factors that came in on this poll that I put out and everything. One of them was a gentleman named Tom Gilbert and everything, and he said that he voted Carter because Biden wasn't an option. He said, I just don't have confidence in Biden's ability to lead people compared to others on the list. And he said that he would have put Bush in there instead of Nixon and might have made it more compelling. And he said, just in my opinion, Carter really did a poor job handling the hostage situation. So that's actually what I was wondering about from our esteemed panel, what they think about the hostage situation and Carter's handling of that. And I also remember, and we're facing that even now, the whole thing with gas prices, because one of the things that Mr. Gilbert added was gas was ridiculous and inflation through the roof. Unfortunately, we're experiencing, as I just said, much of the same today. And they were saying that hopefully Biden will be able to address it and make some changes that would not necessarily handle it the way that Carter did. But what are your thoughts about, if we're going to look at Carter, the way that he handled the hostages and also the way that he handled the crisis that was going on with our gas and oil at that particular time?
Well, I think a lot of it. I'll just get a start with that. I think it all. What I've read about history, and as I looked at successful presidents, it's all about the team that you have around you in terms of having a good cabinet. I think President Biden has those issues today on the foreign policy front, the domestic front. I think President Trump had a lot of turnover in the White House. I mean, there were people, there were open vacancies and they just kept getting rid of people and people leaving. So I think Jimmy Carter had many of the same issues. I mean, he basically took the governor's office of Georgia and brought it to Washington, and it, didn't have the vetted people that really knew how to lead America. And just all of a sudden, these crises came about. I'm going to give him a pass, though, because I do believe that he's been a great American ex-president. And, I think that I'm going to give him a pass as the worst president, because this man at the age of 95 years old has done more for this country and human rights around the world than any person who has been serving in the presidency of the United States. I mean, for God's sakes, him and Rosalind are still out there building homes for Habitat for Humanity. He started a Carter Center at Emory University, where I went, where they were monitoring elections in Haiti. They were addressing global diseases like guinea worm before we were talking about pandemics and living through pandemics ourselves. So I feel like an ex-president doing that so much. This was a man who came from humble beginnings. He was a nuclear scientist, Navy engineer, and he became the president of the United States. Wasn't successful, was in a bad time, but how can we not factor in his contributions to this nation from the day he left the presidency until the age of 95? This man has done nothing but try to help America. So based on that, I think he should not be rated as the worst president there. As far as I'm concerned, America is lucky that Jimmy Carter was born.
But that's not what we're discussing. We want to know what worst president ever during his term. And Jimmy Carter is certainly a leader for that. He couldn't run the economy better than my grandkids could run a car. I mean, the guy was absolutely horrible. And Donald Trump, I don't know why you guys are giving a pass on this guy. You can't give a pass on a guy who says, well, I'm still the president. We're going to make me the elector. You know, the last person who did that was Adolf Hitler. You know, he goes, well, I'm the president for life, Adolf. Come on. And he starts off his presidency with a big lie. Lie. He goes, we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. The wall wasn't built. Mexico didn't pay for it, and that started his presidency.
This is just so absurd. You on the one hand compare Donald Trump to Hitler, and then you want to flip over to he made promises in the election that he didn't keep as being reasons for him being the worst president. How absurd! LBJ, I would have thought, would be a much a stronger candidate for being the worst president.
LBJ's not on the table, we're talking about Carter and Trump.
Well, first of all, Trump did build a good part of the wall.
Well, why do we need to compare?
Hey, Peter, show me the check.
You don't like Donald Trump, right? That's fine.
Show me what? I'll explain that too.
You don't like Donald Trump. That's fine. But to compare
it has nothing to do with it. I don't like liars. The guy just lies to you.
It is absolutely absurd, and I think it would be offensive to the half of America that voted for him.
Well, it's too bad that they did. I mean, the thing is, the first thing he did when he comes into office, he lies to you. Okay, if the first thing you do, Shaq, you meet somebody, he does an old-faced lie, and then you go, well, he's a good person anyway because I like him. Why would you like him? You know, the guy is an obviously liar. To start with.
Let me explain that lie. Let me explain that lie.
I'm going to build a wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. Explain the lie. Yeah, Peter. Peter, where's the check page?
I will explain it as soon as Shakil's finished.
Okay, right, Peter, it's on you.
2 points. 2 points. No, this is really interesting. 2 or 3 points. One, again, okay. If conceding he told a lie, he said something wrong. Trump was not a great communicator. I know that. And he looks gruff sometimes, and he doesn't look happy. And the press went after him on personality. But I look to a president's policies. But let's get to the specifics. So first of all, a good part of that wall is built. It's extremely efficient. As a matter of fact, Texas right now has taken up the mantle because the Biden administration won't continue it. And they're building the wall in their own state. It's extremely effective. And in terms of what Trump might have meant, I always give people the benefit of the doubt. So if the wall was completed, a huge amount of drugs and illicit things, smuggling would, and it is helping a lot, would have been prevented. So Mexico would have paid a huge price, not the Mexican government, but the Mexican economy, because now you don't have the drug trade, which is a gigantic trade in Mexico, and you don't have the people being kidnapped and brought over the borders, and fentanyl and all this stuff, and fentanyl is huge, and it's a curse on America right now. So Mexico would have lost a huge amount of money, and I think also that Trump tried to negotiate for Mexico to pay for it, and they said no. But I'm sure he intended for them to pay for it directly, but indirectly they paid a huge cost, and they will pay a huge cost if the drug trade is interdicted.
Hey, Peter, you just brought up an interesting point in everything, which is this whole concept of communications. Because when I think of great presidents, 2 come to my mind, and I know we're dealing with the vote right now, the worst president, but 2 things come to my mind, and they're actually vastly different. And I may not have even had respect at the time one of them was in office and everything. But, in terms of communication, and one of them came from the world of entertainment. But in terms of communication, actually, I'm gonna make it three. But when I think of communications, I think of definitely Ronald Reagan. He was no doubt a great communicator, no matter what you think of his political views and things of that nature. I think of Obama, the same thing. He was a great communicator and
They
definitely
were
went
both
out
great
there
communicators.
and was a great communicator. And the third one, and I said I would make it three, would be JFK. JFK was definitely an orator and things along those lines. So isn't that a skill set that whoever we decide is the vote would not be a great communicator? Because the three that I just mentioned would probably be for the GOAT. They would probably be the best because of their communication skills. And it doesn't matter what you think of their policies, because there were some policies that I didn't like about Reagan.
Mark, let me add to that comment. That, you know what, communication skills are really important, especially at the time. In other words, at the time that the president is, it has big impacts, in terms of how people feel, everything like that. But if you look at where the economy is going, where the foreign policy is going, where the country's going in the long run, and I do agree with you, those were great communicators. But in the end, it's all about policy and effect, and domestically, economy, foreign policies that are put in. Those are the things that are lasting, and that's what I want from my president. But communication would be nice as a footnote, without a doubt. I totally.
Well, and I think, and real quickly, that's a great point, Mark. As we evaluate these, when I look at right now, the higher approved presidents in the modern era are, believe it or not, President Obama and Bill Clinton, who's around 55.1%. Right now, what's interesting is we've had presidents in the past, outsiders, very charismatic, great communication skills that came into office. John F. Kennedy and Barack Obama. Right. We had Bill Clinton, who came in as an outsider, but what made him interesting was his ability to connect with Southerners. So you have people like Jimmy Carter and LBJ who actually came in as outsiders, but were able to really win because they brought in the South. Jimmy Carter is the governor of Georgia. Bill Clinton is the governor of Arkansas, right? What's interesting, though, is that Bill Clinton had one of the worst scandals in American history. He had an affair with an intern in the Oval Office, said he did not have sexual relations with the woman, and then he came back and won again. Right. So, and a history now looks upon him more favorably now. And now his wife ran for president and lost. And, and we don't know whether she's going to run again or not. Although it's interesting. She's appearing in a lot of shows now that she's done a book, which I find to be interesting that she's appearing in all these news shows again. But anyway, I think that's important to understand communication, how you deal with the crisis, building coalitions. And I think, what's been tough for both these last two presidents is there's a difference between campaigning and governing. And, you can campaign, but when are you going to say, I govern for all the people? I govern. And that's one thing with Trump. I never ever heard him say, he would say the American people, but when he would speak, even when he was inaugurated, I'll never forget, his inauguration was to the Republican base. It wasn't to the people who did not vote for him.
That's your opinion, Steve. But he wanted to unite the country. But look, let's get back to the four presidents, that we're talking about too. Let me just sum this up, because I want to throw out my piece, because time is running. We could spend 2 or 3 hours on four presidents, apparently.
Yes, please.
One, I'll dismiss Nixon too, because I'm going to get to Carter, and I'm going to go after him hard right now. But I want to dismiss Nixon. First of all, the impeachment was embarrassment. Again, personality, bad. I mean, he was accused of paranoia, being a megalomaniac. I think it led to Watergate. Really bad that way. But you know what? You look at what happened. Again, policy, not personality. The Equal Rights Amendment, the Environmental Protection Act, the Clean Air Act. Unemployment was 6%. Not great, not bad. There was some inflation problems, but it was 5%. Not, again, by our standards now, terrible compared to the next guy I'm going to get to. He opened up China, huge thing. The India thing I didn't even know about, but he helped there. He made one big mistake. I'll cost him. He took us off the gold standard. Man, was that a mistake. But you know what? Overall, I'm going to say there's plenty of pluses, and let's get to Jimmy Carter. First of all, you ready for this? In 1979, inflation, CPI, Consumer Price Index, went up 13.5%. In 1980, it went up 12.5%. During his administration, 4 years, 48% increase in CPI. That means every dollar you have is worth 50 cents or somewhere around there. Mortgage rates at 14%. Rated on productivity, and I have a study called EPI, which was a indication of all economic indicators, growth and everything. He was 35 out of 41. Foreign policy. The Soviets increased the Cold War, and things were really bad, and they invaded Afghanistan during his watch. The Iran was a disaster. It was his policy most likely that led to the overthrow of the Shah. And maybe it was good, maybe he had good intention. But and then there was a hostage crisis at that time, which was a disaster for him. And then he sent, and maybe this wasn't all on him, maybe it was the planners, but then they tried to rescue the hostages, and that led to more dire consequences, which were, I believe, fatal, but it was a disaster. So, he is, then, by the way, I'll throw in one more negative. And then when the election came around, he had the worst landslide against him when he tried to rerun of any modern president who ran for re-election. He was slaughtered. I mean, this was not a popular guy. Now, I will give Steve one thing. After he was president, he's probably the nicest president we ever had. I mean, he's great. I once worked for Habitat for Humanity. What a great organization. He's done a lot. But as a person, you don't have that kind of influence on history as a president. So I'm going to look at his presidency, and that's my vote for today.
But Peter and Steve, and this actually comes to something that actually Nick brought up as well earlier. How much of the entire legacy do we have to look at? Because I see what y'all are saying about what they did in their presidency while they were president, but don't we have to look at both the way that what they did afterwards, but also what they did before? We also have to remember that Nixon was very much involved in politics in California at the time of the civil rights struggle. And while I said I was a fan of the Enterprise Zone, I was not that big of a fan of some of the treatments that he gave to some of the African-American leaders of that time, particularly those that were coming from California. And I would argue that same thing around Reagan whenever we get to him and everything. So when we're having this conversation, don't we have to look at the entire context of what they are doing, both their past, their current when they were in office, as well as their future?
It's a definite maybe. Yeah, Sasha.
One thing about Carter, of course, the hostage crisis was his by far biggest fiasco, and this is the only reason why he is a contender, because the inflation and all other stuff. I don't think that it's macroeconomic reasons for that, and I don't think the president at that time in that circumstance could do anything different. Now, about the hostage crisis, imagine that it would happen 10 years later, or 20 years later, or even today. What options are available to US presidents at that time or now? None. Nobody could ever successfully manage the rescue of hostages because of the particular geopolitical situation with Iran. It's even been several times contemplated attack on Iran with Israel or without Israel or so on. Nothing ever happened, and I don't think it will happen because it requires a very, very serious all-out action on the U.S. and U.S. neither in times of Carter or even today or any time between is ready for that action. So therefore, I fail to see how we can blame Carter for unsuccessful rescue mission. The only other alternative was to do nothing.
My vote is based on yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Sasha. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. All I'm saying is that he had no options really.
I'm going with Richard Nixon just because I believe that he was the only one that actually resigned. I think there was so many lies that were told, so many cover-ups from the American people. It was an embarrassment for this nation, and he was a letdown. He was a letdown because he did do some good things as president, but he, as a son of immigrants, I can tell you that there were many people around the world that were just so shocked and disappointed. They left a country where government corruption was rampant, still is today in India, and to have the leader of the free world resign in disgrace was an embarrassment to this country. and led to Gerald Ford, who didn't do a really good job. He pardoned it, which then led to Jimmy Carter coming in, the outsider. So Richard Nixon actually is to blame for Carter becoming the president. And based on that, I think no president can be excused from resigning from office, from disgracing the constitutional oath which he took, who lied to the American people, who covered it up. And it was an embarrassing way to end the presidency of the United States. May he rest in peace. He did rebuild. He wrote a book. He had Henry Kissinger, but Richard Nixon, in my opinion, should go down as the worst president of these four, based on the fact
I
violated the law of this land.
totally disagree. First of all, Nixon did something really great. He appointed my second cousin, Bill Saxby, to be the Attorney General of the United States. So that was good number one. And we went through all the other good stuff he did. The Clean Air Act, the energy, energy. The economy was sailing back then. He balanced the budget. And then what did he do? Well, he tried to help his friends, so he did a cover-up, which today Donald Trump lies routinely and wouldn't leave in
I would
trace.
support
So
Trump.
the thing is,
to
put Nixon down is ridiculous. Nixon was actually a very, very good president. And if it was the same situation today, he'd say, "Oh yeah, I lied. I'm sorry," or he'd say, "So what?" and shrug it off. But if you look at all his accomplishments, he was a great president. So please don't put Nixon. Please don't put Nixon down.
I would like to add something, Nick, to it.
JFK was a lot worse than so
Nixon.
To all the horror of Watergate, I would say what we are learning
Watergate
now
was a joke.
Donald Trump and his role in resurrection of January 6th makes Watergate a kindergarten stuff. Really,
that's what I'm saying.
I'd like to say something about that. I'd like to say something about the
Nixon was a good president. He wasn't like Trump.
Wait.
Show me when Trump balanced the budget.
I'd really like to say something about the insurrection. First of all, there were millions of people who showed up in Washington. Second of all, Trump said, "Do not, just show up." He had a legitimate concern about the election integrity. I still have an election integrity.
That lost 60.
Please, Sasha. We could do 3 shows on what happened in the election, 10. But it's controversial. So he felt the election was stolen from him. You can argue it either way. I know that might sound crazy to some people, but in any case, he said we want to have a peaceful. We're going to have millions of people here. He also then follow this out now. He told Pelosi, he told the authorities, the generals and the police, you might have a problem here. You have millions of people showing up. And it was up to Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi, to decide how many security people, extra people, the civil guard, the National Guard. She turned it down. She didn't take it. And he had suggested through his generals that she should take it. So she was lax on security. But then let's look at the actual event. It was roughly, I believe, 124 people. This whole election, out of millions of people were there. Some of those people were Black Lives Matter. Some of them were liberals. There was a guy, one of them was on a microphone, and you can see this on tape, saying to people, go in. And he was a known liberal. So you have a mix of people. So maybe you had 100 conservatives. Wait. So maybe you have 100 conservatives. It was 124 people. So was it terrible? Absolutely. Nobody should break the law. Also, nobody should have broken the law, and thousands and thousands of people killed in riots for the last several years before that in certain cities. But the point is, we're talking about 124 people, some of whom were liberal, who are now going to change history or change our view of history. I don't think so.
Yeah, stop being such an apologist for Trump. Stop being an apologist for Trump.
I just told you the facts.
No, you didn't tell us the facts.
You're talking about 124 people, some of whom were Black Lives Matter and liberals.
Here's the facts, Peter. Who was in charge during the time of the riots? It was Donald Trump. Okay, just like Truman says, the buck stops here.
Okay, you want to talk about the
riots?
riots?
Took place under Trump's watch. He is the one responsible because
Okay,
it
now
happened under his watch, baby. And so he has to eat this one.
I agree with
So now
Peter.
Of course you agree with Peter because you're a Trump.
insurrection.
No, I agree with Peter because it was a white flag event.
Wait. So now, Nick, you've shifted to a different topic. Wait, so
take some responsibility.
Wait, so I've talked about the 124 people who did the insurrection. some of whom were liberals, but most were
I don't care who
conservative.
they were.
But it's 124 people who are not going to shouldn't be shaping history. And again, some of them were incited by this liberal guy on the microphone, whatever we know is history. But now let's talk about the riots. Yes, they occurred during Trump in Democratic cities,
Right.
and where he offered the National Guard to people. And if he had sent troops in to those cities, he would have been a real fascist or a dictator. But it wasn't within his realm, in that case. So he said to the mayor,
or he would have been a hero.
Please take the police. Please, please take the National Guard. Do something about this. But it was all in Democratic cities, and look at where we are now, since he's left office. Again, I'm trying not to get off the four presidents, but right now the violent crime rate is up 30% since he's left office. Murders, and all the rest, 30% in 1 year. So
that's a discussion for Biden. That's not Trump. We're talking about Trump, baby.
I know. I just said I'm staying away from it, but I'm just saying as soon as he left. So wasn't.
And I'm not an apologist for a guy who lies to me to start with on his presidency, and then what he does, he says, "Well, I should have won the election," and he presented 64 cases.
But you have no problem.
Come on, why am I apologizing to this guy? I'm not
going
to suck up to this guy.
He was a coal miner, and he was a this, and he was a that, and all the stories that he tells about things that he's done that he's never done. You've got no problems with any of that.
Well, Biden's not on the table right now. We have Trump, Nixon.
I wasn't putting Biden on the table.
I'm not an apologist.
I wasn't putting Biden on the table. I was just saying that after Trump left office, at the end, it went up from there. So whatever steps he was doing was probably controlling it better than it has happened since then. I'm not blaming Biden or anybody else.
Well, you have to blame Biden. It's on his watch. Come on.
Now you're saying we are talking about Biden. I'm saying there was nothing Trump could have done short of sending the military in, and then he would have been a real fascist. But it was he wanted to help, just like he told Pelosi in Washington. He had his generals talking to her and saying, and he had suggested this. He said, "You better up the security," and there was no security, no extra security, no extra, very few police, and it allowed 124 people.
Okay, great. It just shows that he's a weak leader. Thanks, Peter. He can't stand up to Nancy Pelosi. He cannot stand up to Nancy Pelosi.
It was Pelosi's job.
So guys, we have to close out. What is the final vote? For me, it's a tie. Nixon and Trump.
Mark Lee did the poll. He's got 455,000 people who watched it. Mark, tell us who's going to be moving on.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This has been a great and interesting discussion. I think that I'm actually going to shock Shaquille and everybody, because I'm actually going to balance it the other way, because sometimes people were asking about Biden and why Biden wasn't on there. So I'm actually going to add 2 Democrats. So I'm going to remove Buchanan, since nobody thinks they know who the heck Buchanan is and everything.
Hang on,
I'm going to remove Nixon.
Wait,
the next poll is going to be Trump, Carter, and the 2 Democrats that I'm going to add, because some people have asked me to add them, but partially because of their views around Native Americans and everything. I'll probably get to Woodrow later, but I think the 2 Democrats I'm going to add are going to be Andrew Jackson and Barack Obama. So those are going to be the next 2 that will be added, is Andrew Jackson and Barack Obama. So it's actually going to be 3 Democrats and only 1 Republican, which will be Trump on this next group and everything. So like I said, Shaquille will probably be shocked, because there's going to be 3 Democrats that folks have an option of getting into. So the new ones will be Andrew Jackson and Barack Obama.
Well, my vote still sticks with James Buchanan, personally. I think that he did a very poor job of dealing with the issues between the North and the South. I think that things like enforcing the Fugitive Slave Act and things like that were terrible. And I think that he had the potential to be able to prevent the Civil War from happening, which it appears, if you look at history, that it was in that direction while he was the president.
Yes. Well, I guess, guys, thank you for a wonderful show. I want to thank everyone for participating. Mark, do we have anything to do before we close out?
No, just if anybody's got any final thoughts that they want to say. You definitely heard from Shaquille his thoughts about our 2 new candidates, and then we'll do another one of these shows. And what are we going to do? These every 2 weeks, Nick, or every
No,
week?
well, next Tuesday, same time, 1 o'clock. Next Tuesday,
Yeah,
Mark.
just-
Then Al Jazeera and our friends at the BBC and everybody can watch the shows and our commentators. So
My
My
next
only
Tuesday,
comment
1
would
o'clock.
be if everybody could stay on
Looks
a
like
little
these are
while.
four.
My comment would be if everybody could stay on after the show,
Yeah.
because I think we need to discuss the format for the next shows.
Oh yeah, well, some of us can stay on for sure, But anyway, let's get ready to close out. I got to put everybody backstage, and we'll be.
Bye.